Have you ever wondered what would happen if the entire economy just stopped? Well, that's pretty much what happened in America during the Great Depression. The plan to fix it was called the New Deal, and it changed the country in ways we still feel today. So let's get into it.
I want to start with just one number that tells a massive story, 25%. I mean, think about that. Imagine 1 out of every 4 adults you know suddenly being out of work. That's how bad things got during the Great Depression. A quarter of the entire country's workforce had no job. It was a level of crisis that's hard to even wrap your head around. So, to really understand why the New Deal was such a big deal, we first have to understand the sheer scale of the problem it was trying to solve. The Great Depression wasn't just a downturn. It was a total economic collapse that touched the life of every single American.
So what did that actually look like? Well, imagine your family's bank just locking its doors for good one day. Life savings that took years, maybe generations to build? Poof, gone in an instant. With no jobs and no money, people were kicked out of their homes. They ended up in these makeshift towns, building shelters out of whatever they could find. Scrap metal, cardboard. And out in the country, farmers were hit just as hard. They had to watch their crops rot in the fields because nobody could afford to buy them, and they lost farms that had been in their families forever.
Okay, so the country was desperate. I mean, truly desperate for a leader who had some kind of a plan. And in 1932, they elected a man who promised exactly that, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or FDR. He called his ambitious plan a New Deal for the American people.
Now, one of the first things Roosevelt did was really clever. He used the hottest new technology of the time, the radio. You can think of it like a national podcast before podcasts were even a thing. He'd get on the air and speak directly to people in their living rooms. These weren't stuffy political speeches. He called them fireside chats. They were calm, reassuring talks that explained what the government was doing, and maybe most importantly, they gave people a reason to feel hopeful.
So the New Deal wasn't just one single law. It was a whole collection of programs built around 3 simple but powerful goals. They became known as the 3 R's. First, relief. Get immediate help, like food and shelter, to people who are starving. Second, recovery. Restart the engine of the American economy. And third, reform. Change the actual rules of the system so a disaster like this could never, ever happen again. The most urgent task by far was getting people jobs. I mean, people needed to work. So the government basically stepped in and became the nation's #1 employer, launching these huge programs designed to put Americans back on their feet.
All right, let's look at one of the first and most popular of these programs, the Civilian Conservation Corps, better known as the CCC. This one had a really unique mission, putting young men to work taking care of the environment.
The CCs sent hundreds of thousands of young men out to national parks all across the country, and the work they did was incredible. They planted over 3 billion trees and built trails and bridges. For all this hard work, they earned $30 a month. Now that might not sound like much, but here's the key part. Most of that money was sent directly home to their families. It was a genius idea. The country's natural spaces were improved, and families got the money they desperately needed to survive. Okay, next up, a program that focused on building really big things. The Public Works Administration, or PWA. The PWA is a great example of how one project can create a huge ripple effect in the economy. See, it didn't just hire construction workers. By building massive projects like highways, dams, and the Triborough Bridge in New York, it created a huge demand for materials like steel and concrete. And what did that mean? Well, factories had to hire more people to make those materials, which meant more jobs and more money flowing through the system. And then you had the biggest New Deal agencies of them all, the Works Progress Administration, or WPA. The WPA really took the whole idea of government-funded jobs to a completely new level.
What's so amazing about the WPA is just how far-reaching it was. Yeah, it employed millions of people to build roads, schools, and airports. But it also did something else. It hired artists to paint murals in public buildings, paid musicians to give free concerts, and even sent writers out across the country to interview people and record their life stories. It was this powerful statement that a nation's art and culture were just as important to save as its economy.
But you know, just creating jobs was only step 1. To really hit that third goal, reform, the New Deal had to try and fix the parts of the system that had broken down so badly in the first place. So to help all those desperate farmers, the government came up with a really bold and honestly pretty controversial plan. The problem was that crop prices had fallen so low that farmers were going broke. The solution? The government actually paid farmers to produce less food, which would hopefully drive the prices back up. But you can see the problem, right? How could the government justify limiting the food supply when so many people in the cities were going hungry? It just shows you how incredibly difficult these decisions were. In many rural parts of the country, life really hadn't changed much in 100 years. The Tennessee Valley Authority, or TVA, was created to fix that. It built a series of massive dams that brought something almost magical to rural homes for the very first time: cheap electricity. This was a total game changer. It meant families could finally have electric lights, refrigerators, and modern appliances, things we totally take for granted today.
Hey, remember how people lost their entire life savings when the banks failed? To make sure that could never, ever happen again, the government created the FDIC. It's basically an insurance policy for your bank account. If your bank goes out of business, the government guarantees you'll get your money back, up to a certain amount. This one reform was absolutely crucial for rebuilding trust in the banking system, and it's still protecting our money today.
Now, here's maybe the most famous and longest-lasting New Deal program of them all, the Social Security Act. This law created a national safety net. For the very first time, the government set up a system to provide a regular income for retired workers. Before Social Security, getting old often meant getting poor. This was basically a promise from the government that it would help take care of its most vulnerable citizens.
The New Deal also dramatically changed life for the average worker. New laws gave workers the official right to form unions and negotiate for better pay and conditions. The government set the first ever national minimum wage, just 25 cents an hour, and I know that sounds like nothing, but it was a huge first step. It also limited the work week and, critically, passed laws to ban most forms of child labor, making sure kids belonged in school, not in dangerous factories.
So, after all these different programs and all these huge changes, what's the lasting legacy of the New Deal? I mean, how did it change America for good?
And as if a total economic meltdown wasn't bad enough, nature decided to throw its own crisis into the mix. The Dust Bowl was a massive environmental catastrophe. A terrible drought and years of poor farming practices led to these huge dust storms that literally blew the topsoil away from millions of acres of farmland. And the New Deal responded to this, too, sending experts to teach farmers new techniques to protect the land. It showed this new role for government even extended to protecting the environment itself.
So, did the New Deal perfectly end the Great Depression? Not exactly. The massive spending for World War II is what really did that. But its legacy is absolutely undeniable. It built a ton of the infrastructure we still use every day: bridges, dams, parks. It put rules on our financial system to try and prevent another total collapse. But most of all, it fundamentally changed what Americans expect from their government when a major crisis hits.
And that really gets to the heart of it all. More than any single program, the most powerful and lasting legacy of the New Deal was this brand new idea that the government has a responsibility to make sure every citizen has a basic level of security and a fair shot at opportunity.
And this all leads us to a huge question, one that people are still fiercely debating today. How much should a government do to solve a national crisis? Where do you draw the line? The New Deal provided one set of answers, but the conversation it started about the government's role in our lives is more relevant now than ever.